Hello, today we'll be reviewing the 2020 comedy action movie, Fat Man. Beware, spoilers ahead. The film opens and we see a spoiled rich boy named Billy write a letter to Santa Claus. His parents are always away on work and he's only watched by his elderly grandmother. We then meet Santa, who is at his farm in the North Pole. He's a bit different than normal, and after he finishes making toys for the day, he goes outside and uses beer cans for target practice. His wife then tells him this is the lowest year for presents, and they are losing income because more kids are naughty than nice. At school, Billy comes in second place in his science fair, which he can't accept. He calls his hired hitman and tells him what happened. Soon after, the hitman brings the science fair winner over and ties her up. Billy gives him a forged check in his grandmother's name, then threatens the girl and says he's never lost a competition. He tells her to say she cheated on the project and not tell anyone about their encounter, and she agrees. The next day, Billy receives a #1 medal and a note that informs him his competitor cheated. At the North Pole, Santa talks to some government agents who are invested in his Christmas business. They tell him his toy deliveries are down and they can't pay him his usual payment. Santa gets angry, but they offer him a new military contract which he initially refuses. That night it's Christmas and he reluctantly leaves to deliver presents. In the morning, Billy comes down the stairs and sees the cookies he left for Santa are eaten. There are many presents under the tree and he sees one with his name. Billy quickly opens it but looks shocked when he sees what's inside. It is a lump of coal and he races outside and screams, "You just messed up big time, Fat Man." We then see the hitman who is training with some weapons. He gets a call from Billy who tells him he has a new job for him. The hitman asks who it is, and Billy says he would like him to kill Santa Claus. He says he is very interested and is eager to get it done because Santa also let him down as a child. The next day, Santa calls the government and tells them he'll accept the contract because they are too low on money. He is depressed, and he tells Mrs. Claus that he's thinking of retiring because no one respects him anymore. The two argue and she tells him he needs to regain his spirit. At his house, the hitman begins to look up the location of Santa. He trains and sets up a wall full of images and stories of the famous holiday man. He then looks at a small police car, which is the only toy Santa ever gave him as a kid. Later, he drives up to a mailman and asks where the letters to Santa go. The man says he doesn't know, and the hitman kills him and steals the mail truck. He sneaks into the post office in a stolen uniform and he enters the supervisor's office. The hitman swears at him and tells him he's looking for the Fat Man. The supervisor acts confused and the hitman pulls out a gun and points it at him. Eventually, he writes down a P.O. box where they send all of Santa's letters. The hitman smiles as he reads it and the supervisor asks what happens now. He then turns and shoots him and leaves the building. Back at his house, the hitman calls Billy and tells him things are in motion and he'll be on the road tonight. He then prepares his weapons, which include a large sword, 2 silenced guns, and a briefcase full of explosives. He turns off his lights and leaves for the journey. At the North Pole, Santa talks with an army sergeant. He then looks over the toy factory and tells his elves congratulations on their work this year and they all clap. Santa then reveals that due to the rising number of naughty children, their business is running low on money. To make up for that, he reveals he signed a 2-month contract with the military to make fighter jet parts. Santa tears up and apologizes, and the sergeant briefs the elves on the new rules of the factory. He tells them they are upgrading security, and he cuts off the bells on their shoes so they don't falsely trigger the metal detectors. We then see the military arrive at Santa's farm to monitor the construction and guard the factories. The hitman then arrives in Canada and tells the officials the purpose of his visit is to go hunting. He drives for a while and eventually arrives at North Peak, Alaska and enters a local post office. The hitman lies saying he is looking for a friend of his and he knows the P.O. box number. The worker reveals that it's the box of Kris Kringle, but he doesn't know any other information about him. Another woman enters and tells him that she knows Kris drives a red Ford truck. The hitman then goes to a hunting store and looks through some outfits. He eventually finds a white snowsuit and purchases it along with some skis. That night, he stakes out the post office and waits for Santa to come. As he sits in his car, he gets a call from Billy who asks about the status of the mission. The hitman tells him he is getting closer and Billy says he wants a keepsake from the head. He initially wants Santa's head, but the hitman protests and they eventually agree on his coat. Billy hangs up and we see him painting pictures of Santa being killed. The next morning, Santa drives to the post office and the hitman spots him entering the building. Inside, the worker tells Santa someone is looking for him, but Santa assumes it must be one of the government workers. As he walks outside, the hitman aims his sniper at him from inside his car. When he goes to take a shot, a large truck pulls up and blocks his view. When it drives away, Santa is already back in his truck and driving away. Santa then begins to drive home and the hitman follows him from a distance. They go down some back roads and eventually end up at a hidden driveway in the woods. Santa enters the road, but the hitman pulls off to the side. He runs through the woods and watches as Santa drives past some armed military guards. He keeps running and finally spots Santa's farm. but it is guarded by the military on snowmobiles and trucks. The hitman pauses, then he runs back to his car to gather some supplies. He grabs some explosives and a silenced automatic rifle. We then see the guards talking when suddenly they hear a noise. They walk outside to investigate it and they discover a single white ski on the ground. The pair look up at the mountains, but they don't notice the hitman in the distance behind them with his gun drawn. At the farm, Santa is in a good mood because of the check he picked up from the post office. Tim and his wife embrace and lay down together. At the guard post, we see both of the military guards have been killed by the hitman. He ventures further into the farm and kills 2 more men who are on snowmobiles. He sneaks up to a building with his silenced rifle and he eliminates one last soldier before entering inside. He sneaks inside and carefully walks through the toy factory. The hitman hears some people coming, so he quickly hides in another room. He places some explosives and discovers all the elves at work. However, as he stares at them, an elf approaches him and carries one of the explosives he found. The elf asks if he is one of the military men and the hitman lies, saying he is. He tells him to put the bomb down, but the elf opens it so the hitman starts shooting at him. The workers hear the shots and the factory floor turns into complete chaos. Some guards wonder what is happening, but they hear the gunfire and one of them is struck through a window and dies. The hitman hides behind the workstations and fires at the other army man. The elves run from the floor and one of them initiates emergency protocol. More soldiers enter the building, but they are quickly mowed down by the hitman. He then lights 2 explosives and throws them in their direction. The firefight rages on and one elf radios for Santa and tells him they are under attack. Santa quickly jumps out of bed and Mrs. Claus hands him 2 guns. At the factory, elves escape and the sergeant runs out but is shot in the back multiple times. The hitman slowly creeps out, but he is attacked by more elves. He shakes them off and kills one, but the others run away. The hitman then throws one final explosive in the toy factory and he hides behind a car as it explodes. He then hears a deep rumbling voice yell, "That's enough." He looks up and sees Santa Claus walking out of his log cabin. The 2 face each other with guns at their side and the hitman tells him, "You forgot about me." He then pulls out the toy car and screams, "This is the only gift you ever got me." He throws the car at him, and Santa tells him he is sorry and he couldn't replace his deceased parents like the hitman asked him to in letters. The hitman then yells, saying, "I'm here for your head, fat man." Santa coldly responds, saying, "You're not the first to try," and the 2 square off. The shooting then begins and the hitman fires his rifle while Santa uses dual revolvers. After a minute, the hitman has to reload and Santa approaches while shooting at him. Santa is hit and falls behind a tractor, but when the hitman peeks he manages to shoot him in the shoulder. Santa takes this opportunity to run up to the wood pile he is hiding behind and the man doesn't notice him. He grabs a wooden log and sneaks over and smacks the hitman in the face with it. They fall to the ground and start wrestling and Santa throws some punches telling him it's over. However, the hitman has a hidden knife which he deploys and stabs Santa with 2 times. Santa falls over in pain and the hitman picks up his pistol and aims it at his head. Santa shakes his head, but the hitman shoots him and he slumps over with blood around him. The hitman pauses and thinks he has won the fight, but he is suddenly shot in the back. He turns and sees Mrs. Claus, and he hits her with a bullet, but she makes it back inside. He limps into the house after her and holds his weapon cautiously. He sees a trail of blood and goes to follow it, but Mrs. Claus appears behind him with a gun. She says she is sorry, then she finishes him off with one final blast. She and the elves then rush to Santa's side and call his name. He is still alive and she tells him to try and relax. We then flash to Billy and he hears his grandma complaining about missing money which he used to pay the hitman. He then sits in his room and someone rings the doorbell at the house. Billy gets a knock at the door and thinks it is his maid, but he is surprised when Mr. and Mrs. Claus enter. Santa stares at the boy coldly with gauze over his eye, then unwraps it and tells Billy to look at it. He tells the boy that the hitman is now buried in the ground like other attackers. Finally, he tells Billy if he is ever bad again, he will sneak into his house at night and kill him as he sleeps. Billy cries out of fear and Santa says, "I'm watching you," and leaves. As the film comes to a close, we see Santa has regained his Christmas spirit and they are making positive changes at the North Pole.